Welcome to Real Clear Radio Hour. This is your host, Bill Frezza. Say the word drone, and until recently, most people would conjure up images of Hellfire missiles raining down on foreign terrorists. All that changed when Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos revealed plans to develop a drone-based package delivery service. Whether this was just a publicity stunt or the sign of things to come, the public has since become increasingly aware of both the promise and perils of commercial domestic drone technology. Today we have with us Jonathan Downey, co-founder and CEO of Airware, a San Francisco-based startup developing autopilots for commercial unmanned aircraft. He's going to give us some insight into the challenges that have to be overcome to actually get this technology out of the lab and into commercial use. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Bill.
We first met 10 years ago when you were a freshman at MIT, but it was shortly after we graduated that we first chatted about your dream to start a company in this field?
Yeah, that's true. I really started in the space as an undergrad, but like many young 20 or 22-year-olds, didn't have all the tools to make it happen. And so it wasn't until several years later that I think this market was ready for Airware, and I was ready for Airware.
Well, it's an amazing story. I mean, you've since raised $10 million from Andreessen Horowitz and Google's venture capital arm, which is pretty much the top of the VC market out in Silicon Valley. But you didn't do that in one shot. You went through the Y Combinator program. Is that correct?
We did. We actually raised about $3 million in seed funding during Y Combinator, and then 10.7 afterwards.
Wow. Tell us a little about the Y Combinator experience. They've husbanded quite a few companies along the way.
Y Combinator is really great. I can't say enough great things about them because, as a young entrepreneur, especially as a first-time entrepreneur like myself, you don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. And so to have really experienced entrepreneurs like the partners at Y Combinator and also all the other entrepreneurs, in your batch and in the room is hugely helpful every time something comes up and you say, gosh, I wish I had done this before, or, this is the first time I'm having to hire for, this position. It's great to have a network of people that you can go to and say, okay, well, when you did this, how did you guys think about the problem?
Right. You can make new mistakes rather than repeat the same mistakes over and over.
Right. And there's plenty of new mistakes that you could make.
And how long were you in the program before you graduated?
It's a fixed length program. So it was January through March of 2013 for me.
2013. Okay, I didn't realize you were into 2013, but it was 2012 that Airware announced its first product.
It is. We worked on our product throughout 2012, and we sent an early kind of beta version of it to customers beginning in November of 2012, so prior to Y Combinator. And I think we were a little bit unique in that regard, although this is the, something like the 10th batch of Y Combinator, and I think it's becoming more common for companies to really have a product that's already been launched for a little bit before they get into Y Combinator, and then to really be able to focus on growth and scaling that, during Y Combinator.
Before we get into Airware's products, and I do want to do that, let's back up a minute and try to get the big picture and really look at the big picture and start with, can you explain to us what the difference is between a remotely piloted unmanned aerial vehicle and an autonomous UAV?
Sure. A lot of the early drones developed in the military were remotely piloted vehicles. And what that means is there's essentially a pilot on the ground, and they actually designed the system to try to make it as much like a manned aircraft as possible from the pilot's perspective. And then the pilot is just not in the aircraft. And the benefits of doing it that way are, the aircraft doesn't need all of the weight and all of the systems to support the pilot. And so you can use all of that weight for fuel instead and make the aircraft fly a lot longer. And then, of course, if anything goes wrong, you aren't putting lives at risk.
The pilot at risk, right? And an autonomous UAV is a little bit like Google's driverless car. Is that correct?
It is, but in the air. And one of the first aircraft that I think really met that mark was Northrop Grumman's Global Hawk. That is an aircraft that by and large is fully autonomous, and the people on the ground are primarily directing it where to fly and where to point cameras.
Do these things have missions that you push the button, it goes away, does its mission, and comes back, or along the way it's being monitored and given new instructions?
Certainly on the military side of things, there's a pretty large footprint for most of these systems. The Global Hawk, for example, has, I believe, certainly more than 6 people, I think, kind of constantly monitoring it,
Wow.
constantly, interfacing with the aircraft. Our goal, one of our goals at Airware, is to really be increasing the level of autonomy of these small commercial drones while making them, safer and reliable and able to be operated by no more than one person.
Well, certainly, if it's going to make money for anybody,
Right.
it can't require a team of 8. That would be a problem.
Yeah.
But this is not going to happen tomorrow in the U.S. I mean, the FAA still has a long way to go to approve these products.
It is, and Congress mandated that the FAA develop a program for integrating commercial drones into the national airspace system, and that happened actually in January of 2012. So right as that happened, that was really when Airware was beginning to work on what is kind of our product now.
Well, stop for a minute, because people have been flying model aircraft for recreation without FAA approval for decades, right? As long as you stay under 400 feet and don't whack anybody, the FAA hasn't paid much attention to that. Why all of a sudden a new set of rules?
And the FAA is currently allowing people to operate even these autonomous drones under what are called hobbyist rules. So within line of sight, under 400 feet above the ground, they're allowing that. What they are expressly prohibiting at this point is the commercial operations of them.
So you can't make money at it, but as long as you're operating line of sight, you can experiment.
That's correct.
And is that how? I mean, Google's been flying these things for a long time for Google Maps and Google Earth, haven't they?
I'm aware of a few times that Google has used them for imaging, and I believe they were outside of the U.S.
Oh, really?
So I'm not aware of any times they've flown them in the U.S. for Google Maps.
Would you say more of the development and more of the deployment is going on in foreign countries right now?
Certainly, more of the use is going on in foreign countries. The United States is a little bit unique in that in the United States, you can go rent a plane, and I'm a commercial multi-engine rated pilot myself, and have my private pilot license. That's how I got started flying. And with a private pilot license, you can go and rent a plane or fly your own plane, and you can fly from point A to point B, and in most cases, never talk to air traffic control, never file a flight plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so and that's pretty unique to the United States.
I mean, in many ways, it's like boating. You get out on your boat, you don't file plans, you don't talk to anybody, you just look out for yourself.
Exactly. And so there exists the potential for conflict between manned and unmanned aircraft in the United States in a way that is a little bit unique globally. In Europe, for example, you can't do that. You have to file flight plans in advance. You have to follow a very specific path. And so it's easier for the government to deconflict manned and unmanned aircraft.
I know the FAA has published a roadmap and in terms of how and when it's going to develop these various regulations. What does that look like? When do you think they'll be laying down rules that would allow the commercial opportunities to open up?
Well, there are supposed to be coming out with more rules beginning in early 2014, but then there is a process that those rules have to go through. So they're not going to immediately be in effect. There's time for people to be able to provide feedback on those rules. And then there's, committees that are meeting on them. We're involved pretty heavily in a lot of that process. And the expectation is that these rules are going to be in effect by mid-2015.
That's not that far away. People have time to get ready for it, but it's not as if it's trying to get a new drug approved through the FDA.
Correct. And it's certainly our expectation that whoever, some of the big winners in 2015 and beyond are beginning to operate today.
And take us through sort of at a high level, take us through sort of the key rule issues. What are the areas that they're going to be specifying regulations on?
Sure. So one of them is whether you have to operate the aircraft within line of sight of an operator, or whether you are able to operate the aircraft what's considered beyond line of sight. And so that's kind of an area of contention and rulemaking. Another is what are the qualifications of the person operating the vehicle? Can it be a day's training program? Can it be something that is being taught at universities and in trade programs, or does it need to be a rated pilot?
A rated pilot, wow. Are there constituencies out there pushing one way or another? Are there antis trying to slow this down? Are there labor groups or trade groups that are trying to push it one way or the other?
I'm not sure about everybody involved, but there certainly are people pushing for these drones only being operated by rated pilots. And at Airware, we certainly think that's probably a mistake. There's probably scenarios where maybe a pilot or somebody who understands the national airspace system well should be involved. But there's a lot of applications where that certainly does not need to be the case. Imagine taking a drone out of the trunk of your car and kind of driving out to a small farm and being able to fly over the field and quickly image it. You're not going to need to fly more than 400 feet or 500 feet above the ground. You're not going to need to really interface with the national airspace system. You will potentially need to avoid any aircraft that may fly over because, as we said, manned aircraft can be almost anywhere, but they're not supposed to be kind of scud running at 500 feet. And that's where I think things like transponders come into play. And so that's another area of rulemaking is who needs transponders? What are the capabilities of these transponders so that manned aircraft can see unmanned aircraft? Because other than a transponder, it's almost impossible for these manned aircraft to spot them visibly or via radar.
No, they'd look like birds. They'd be invisible. And I guess there could be geographic differences. I mean, flying over farmland might be different than trying to fly through the canyons of Manhattan.
Yeah, absolutely. So where they're going to be operated, is it overpopulated or non-populated areas are definitely part of the rulemaking as well.
So the starting gun may sound as soon as 2015, which ought to be music to the ears of your investors, I would expect.
So certainly everyone involved with Airware is very excited for rules to be in place.
Well, talk about applications. Open us up a little bit. You've mentioned farming. I've seen the news. I've seen all sorts of aerial surveillance applications. Jeff Bezos is dreaming about delivering your packages to your back porch. Run us down applications sort of in the order that you think might achieve commercial scale.
Sure. And I think, as we've already discussed a little bit, agriculture is pretty high on that list. Agriculture is a case where there's really a strong business case for using these for agricultural purposes, because if you can, earlier in the stage of a crop, identify areas of a crop that are stressed, you can react to that quickly and increase your crop yields and also potentially decrease water usage, agriculture being one of the very largest uses of fresh water. So decreasing water usage there is tremendously valuable. Another area is infrastructure inspections. And so these are things like power lines, pipelines, bridges, levees, oil derricks, anything that you need to check on kind of regularly, where what you're really trying to get at is a high resolution image of what's going on. Are we seeing corrosion? Do we need to replace a part of the pipeline?
Maintenance.
Yeah, exactly. Maintenance. Where do we need to do the maintenance? And rather than send maintenance crews out everywhere, or rather send people out everywhere to do these inspections, I think a lot of these can be done by small drones.
Let's go back to the agriculture for a bit. I remember looking very carefully at some robot tractor applications. Oh, geez, it must be 10 years ago now, which have since come into the field doing quite well for plowing, planting, weeding, seeding. Do you see drone crop dusters in the future?
I believe Japan is already using some commercial drones for crop dusting. And so, at some point, it's kind of business metrics and things that come into play and the cost associated with doing it. I think in the United States, I don't expect to see as many crop dusters as more on the imaging side. So, commercial drones to decide where do we need to dust more or apply fertilizer or apply a pesticide, for example. And that may be applied actually by some of these robotic tractors that you're talking about.
Right. So you can actually have your farmer sitting at home in front of his Xbox, running his whole farm.
Someday, I think.
Well, I think that might come sooner than I'm going to see packages delivered to my back door by helicopters from Amazon. That sounds like an awfully tough one. I mean, just when it comes to dealing not with other aircraft, but with dealing with the rest of the world, my neighbors, the dogs. I mean, seriously, Jonathan, do you think that's ever going to happen?
I'll tell you what, I agree that I think it's probably one of the applications that is farthest out with the most complexities on the technology side as well as on the regulatory side and even in the safety, reliability, and people's perception of it.
Yeah, just wait for the first lawsuit that comes along. And then I can imagine what fun people would have trying to snatch these packages as they come by.
Oh yeah, I've definitely heard people who have said things along the lines of, "Oh, I can't wait for this to happen. I'm going to order something on Amazon that costs 50 cents and wait with a net for that thing to show up."
Well, for all the laughing we do, it was a brilliant PR move to remind everybody about Amazon Prime right before the Christmas shopping holidays.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's been good for the industry as well because what we've certainly seen in this industry is there's a lot of people who are worried about, quote unquote, drones flying in the United
Yep.
States. I think it's because, people are not really very aware of the commercial applications for drones. I think most people only have familiarity with the word in the context of them being used overseas for military surveillance and military direct action. And so I think the more that people see some of the great commercial applications that are really going to benefit people's lives, the better. Because as people become familiar with delivery of vaccines and medicines in remote areas of the world and agricultural applications and getting people out of harm's way and off of rooftops doing inspections and onto the ground flying these small drones, I think it's really gonna change people's perception.
Yeah, but there's always going to be a yin and a yang of that. I mean, look at to give a parallel development, the development of digital cash, which has been something people have been attempting for years. Bitcoin is the latest example. Regulators have always used their concern over money laundering as a reason to slow that down. Do you worry that regulators will use concern about smuggling to retard commercial drone businesses? I mean, after all, smuggling sounds like a great application.
That's not one I've heard much about. I certainly can imagine that people, to some degree, must be doing that somewhere in the world. I think the corollary here is privacy. I think there are definitely people who are potentially kind of retarding the adoption of commercial drones because of concerns with privacy, and I think that's a little bit misplaced because I think this technology is very similar to GPS, for example. GPS is a technology that was developed absolutely for the military, funded by the government. And I think if you had asked people 10 or 15 years ago whether they were all willing to carry around
Tracker devices in their pockets.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people would have thrown their arms in the air and said, this is absolutely, of course not. We're not going to do that. And then, it wasn't very long at all before everyone, happily has these on them.
Yeah, well, people talk a lot about privacy, but they seem to be willing to surrender it very quickly if there's something of value they get in return.
That's true. And the other half of it that you don't hear about in the news is that there's all kinds of great technological ways to protect people's privacy. And I think that's going to be the same thing here as well.
Right. It's just to open up more opportunity for development. So let's swing around and come back to Airware. Exactly what do you build? You call your product both a platform and an operating system for UAVs. What does that mean?
So on the military side of things, these drones have been developed on very large budgets over very long time frames because what they do is they take a data link from one vendor and a autopilot from another vendor and software requirements and hardware requirements, and then they integrate all of this together, and it's such a large endeavor. These companies are actually typically called UAV integrators or drone integrators. And my motivation for starting Airware was that I looked at that and I said, okay, this is fine where you basically have one customer, which is the government,
right,
and you basically have one application, which is surveillance.
And it doesn't have to make money, and you've got an infinite budget.
Basically, yeah. But on the commercial side of things, I expected that, and we're certainly seeing now that there's just this huge variety in different applications and a lot of different types of companies that are going to be using this technology. And so, there really needed to be a platform that people can build on top of because each of these companies building a drone, say, for agriculture, they don't want to get involved in the low-level details of flight control algorithms and real-time operating systems and integrating a bunch of hardware developed by different vendors, which is disparate and not really meant to work together.
So you're the brain. You're basically the brain of the drone.
With the brain of the drones and the glue, essentially, that connects all of these devices together.
But you don't build engines, you don't build wings, you don't build landing gear. Someone else does that.
Exactly.
And what's involved if you talk about selling your technology to a customer? What's involved in them using it and putting it in an end product?
Well, they mechanically install it into the aircraft. They configure some settings to fly the aircraft, or we do it for them. And at that point, they're really able to hand off, the flying of the vehicle to Airware's expertise, and that really is our core expertise. And then they can focus on, which camera system they want to use, whether they want to integrate a transponder, and all of those things are as seamless as possible. And then also the development of some of the very high-level kind of application-specific software.
So writing an app for an Airware-equipped drone would be like writing an app for my iPhone?
Yeah, very similar.
And you wall off your software from their software? Are there things that they can't get their hands on?
Definitely, and I think that's really required in this space because safety and reliability really should always be paramount in people's minds, and it's certainly going to be first and foremost in the minds of the FAA. And so, by leveraging the Airware platform, customers essentially have a strong case that their vehicle is going to be safe and reliable because the underlying kind of core hardware and software is.
So do you expect the FAA to be certifying your software?
Certification is definitely going to play a role in this space. I think the FAA certainly hasn't said definitively what will require certification and what will not require certification. But I think that it's in everyone's best interest that if there really are 1,000 of these vehicles flying over the U.S. in a couple years, that they're not made by 100 different vendors with 100 different pieces of electronics and 100 different kind of core software and flight algorithms.
Although quite honestly, that sounds a little self-serving if you're the first one out of the box.
Well, I think we certainly were not the first ones. There's been companies making autopilots for some time now, and I think the real challenge here is to make a system that's safe and reliable, but it's also open enough that everybody can accomplish what they're trying to do.
Talk about that.
Everything that's existed in the space, I think, prior to Airware was really largely a black box, something that did 7 things. But if you ever wanted to do the 8th or the 9th, if you envisioned something new, a new application for a drone, your hands have been pretty much tied. And that's what I saw right when I got into this space as an undergraduate at MIT. I was working with other students on some research projects and building a small aircraft for an intercollegiate competition. And we were using some of the black box autopilots at the time. And, our hands were pretty much tied, so much so that we eventually ended up tossing our autopilot out and making one ourselves.
Well, it give you your start in the business, I guess.
Well, the motivation at that time wasn't to start a business at all. It was, we wanted to get an aircraft flying as quickly as possible, and then we wanted to develop some stuff on top of that. And we were just unable to do that with the black box autopilots at the time. And I think a lot of companies in this space have been faced with a very difficult decision, not of can we take something and then build on top of it, because that hasn't really been a viable option, but they're faced with, okay, do we build this ourselves? Do we direct our resources, our engineering resources, our personnel resources, and our capital to developing an autopilot? Or do we save all of that and focus that energy on serving the end user's needs? And I think they all want to do the latter, of course, but they've been forced to some degree to do the former. And they've either been doing that or they kind of take the black box autopilot and they're really limited in what they can do with it, and they end up adding additional computers and interfacing those computers with the autopilot. Yep. And then it starts to become a big hardware software integration effort themselves.
So it's a classic division of labor, and presumably you use open APIs or application programmer interfaces to make it as easy as possible for their software to call on your software.
Absolutely. And so companies that are building on top of the Airware platform, they have a lot of the underlying problems solved for them that are common across all commercial drones. And what it allows them to do is it allows them to focus on the particular problems that are unique to their vertical or market or application and solve those better than anyone else in the market.
Do you ever see the FAA settling on a standard set of APIs that all manufacturers can follow?
I think it would be pretty unique case, I think, if the government came out and was able to act as quickly as technology was developed and establish a set of standards like that. In most spaces, and I think Silicon Valley has seen this over and over, these standards end up getting, they are set essentially by whoever develops the best ones and gets the most adoption.
Yeah, but if you think about, and I recall in the commercial, in the private aircraft business, for a long time, the navigation hardware and software completely stagnated because the small companies, the Piper Cubs of the world, really weren't able to spend the time and the money certifying entirely new flight systems. And that technology languished. Do you worry that that could happen in this area if the FAA can't move fast enough with the technology cycles?
Well, the U.S. market is, I think, at most maybe half of the global market, and this technology is already being used in pretty significant ways, in the rest of the world. And so it could stagnate in the United States because of oppressive regulations, potentially. But I don't think that's going to happen in a lot of other areas of the world. Other area, Australia, for example, I think has been very, very quick to adopt this technology for commercial applications. That may be the case because there are fewer people flying manned aircraft there, or it may be the case that it's an island. And, I think Australia has a bit more of a motivation for being able to do things like border patrol with this technology.
Well, Jonathan, we've certainly learned a lot about the drone business today. It looks like there's an exciting future both for yourself and others. Thanks so much for being on the program.
Thank you, Bill, for having me. Great to chat.
You've been listening to Real Clear Radio Hour. This is your host, Bill Frezza, and we've been chatting with Jonathan Downey, co-founder and CEO of Airware, making brains for drones. Thanks for being with us.